Do you struggle with composition in your photography with terms like rules of thirds, triangles, leading lines, the Fibonacci, I don't know how to pronounce that, negative space, all those things that could just totally confuse you? Well, today I'm going to try to simplify it for you and show you ways in Adobe Lightroom you can overlay various composition guides to help you understand and compose better photographs. So if you don't have Adobe Lightroom or something like it, you really need to if you want to improve your photography. This isn't a pitch for them. I'm just telling you that you need something like that to get this done properly. When you compose a photograph, you need to compose it so it's most pleasing for a person to view it. There's other things involved in this, like proper lighting and exposure and those kind of things. But composition really is important in art. Composing something to where the viewer looks at it and their eye is drawn to it and stays in the image makes or breaks a good image, whether it's a photograph or a painting. So let me show you some more here about composing photographs. Here's a photograph I took down in Zion National Park here in Utah one fall. This is known as the Watchman. So in Adobe Lightroom, you go to develop for your cropping guides, and if you press R on your keyboard, it will bring up the cropping guides. You can scroll between them by hitting O. See, look at that. So this one right here is the thirds, the rule of thirds. The rule of thirds is the basic and most common used way of composing a photograph. How it works is when you compose the photograph, envision, or you can actually, some cameras will overlay it for you, envision 4 lines going through the image, 2 horizontal lines and 2 vertical lines. Where these lines intersect are the points of impact that the eyes will be drawn to. Now, as you can see in this one, I don't have the Watchman completely up in the third. That's okay. It's a general rule. It's not a hard and strict rule that you need to adhere to. Whatever. So, as I said, selecting O in Lightroom, once you've got the cropping guide open, will change it around to various ones. There's a grid, here's triangles, here's the center point, and here's the golden rule, the golden compass. What is that called? Golden triangles. It's part of a whole mathematical formula known as the golden ratio. There's a whole lot of stuff going on here that's been known and used for thousands of years. But to make it simple, you use this mathematical equation, which is A plus B over A equals A plus B. Wait, what? So this whole concept is part of what's called the Fibonacci sequence or spiral. So it's based on patterns in nature, like the spiral of leaves on a tree, or the really classic example is the spiral of a seashell, how you've got those spirals. These things really occur in nature a lot, and trying to compose a photograph that has a natural sequence to it really helps. Here's an example of the Fibonacci spiral or the golden ratio or the phi grid. It goes by different names, but as you can see in this overlay on me, it helps you compose a photograph. Now, honestly, not very many people actually use this in the field. You're not out photographing in the field and visualizing this sequence, this spiral over your photographs typically. Some of the newer cameras have it where you can overlay it like they do the rule of thirds, but I don't visualize this when I'm out photographing. I visualize the rule of thirds and stick with that generally. I will compose things slightly outside of the rule of thirds. And interesting enough, they typically fall into this spiral. So it's just a natural way of doing things. So if you keep hitting O, I keep getting sidetracked here. If you keep hitting O, not 0, but O, on on the keyboard. Here is a grid overlay that is based on the Fibonacci spiral. Did I say that? Fibonacci, did I say that right? So it shows the points of impact a little bit different. It's the same basic thing as the rule of thirds, but it's got them, the horizontal lines and the vertical lines, closer in together. And you can see in this one, the watchman here is right at that point. If I hit O again, it brings up the Fibonacci spiral. Now when you're in Lightroom and you're trying to see how this works on your images, you can actually hold down the shift and press the O and switch it around. It will move it around to the various areas. So as you can see, this one's probably the best composition using that, where you have this line coming in and up and around, and the spiral comes in. Now, in theory, your subject should be right in this spiral. It doesn't always work, and you're not always going to get the Fibonacci spiral to work on your photographs. But if you stick with the rule of thirds, you're probably going to be in the ballpark. This photograph is about the lines. I loved when I composed it, the line of the river here curving around and disappearing, the line of this tree leading in, bringing your eyes in, and then the line of the watchman coming up into the sky. Let's look at a couple other examples of how this works. Here's a photograph I took over in England. Something I didn't like about this, and it messed up the composition, was this shutter here. If I go to develop and start dropping in the various cropping things, you can see there in the thirds, that was pretty close. Those daffodils were pretty close. The triangles are nice, the way the triangles fit in there. And the Fibonacci swirl, it works pretty good in that. But I didn't like that window shutter. So I ended up cropping it out and photoshopping a little bit along the edge to get the rest of the window shutter out. Now, when I look at it, look at how the spiral is sitting better right there. It sweeps around and comes in and just brings it right in there. If I look at the rule of thirds, it's a little bit off, but it's fine. The triangles where they intersect are close, and the golden ratio there is off. So it's not always going to work on every image, obviously. But when you compose, you want to try to think in this realm of where's the subject going to be that's going to draw the most attention to it, and keep the viewer's eyes looking at the image. Another example of composition is doing things like a frame within a frame, trying to find subjects that are framed by something else. In this example, I was photographing Old Wardour Castle in England, and I really liked this door, but the sun was behind a cloud. So I went over, I visualized my composition to see what I needed to do, and then when the sun came out, I ran over there, set up, and captured this. The whole roof of the building is gone, and so the sunlight was just streaming down through that whole open roof, lighting up that doorway. I just really loved this picture. So it's a picture in a picture. You've got this castle wall and the interests on it, the grass, the stairs coming up, and the arch, and then what's going on inside of it. Now that's a classic example of just composing it in the center. If you look, like there's the thirds are not really sitting anywhere. And the center, it's just right about on center. The triangles, this is the Fibonacci sequence in a grid, and it's pretty close. And then the spiral doesn't really work because it's composed in the center. It's perfectly fine to compose the subject in the center sometimes and leave negative space around the edges. That's a term that you're going to also need to get used to, is negative space. That sometimes having just nothing else around it but just open space, blurry, or textures, and then have the subject right in the middle really works. Here's another example of an image that is composed to the center and it's just repeating patterns in abstract, but it's visually pleasing to the eye. This is a train bridge. It's actually this. And in this image, I stood way over here on the right, right up against the hillside, and shot right down through the center to get this. I really loved how it turned out, and it wouldn't have been as good had the light not been right. You see in this how long the shadows are. The lighting really needs to be good in a photograph to make it nice also, and that's something we're going to get to in the next lesson. But you can see, because the light is coming through at a low angle across here, it really helped light up and separate each one of these columns. Each one is defined because the way the light hit it. So in this example, composition's dead in the center. There's no actual point of impact. It's just this abstract image that your eye just goes into and stays in because you're looking deeper and deeper trying to figure out what's going on. What am I looking at? Here's another example of a frame in a frame. This is Vickers Close in Wells, England. It's an old medieval street that goes down in dead ends, and I really liked this gatehouse. So I framed the image with the gatehouse and the door opening up, showing the street. If I look at the compositional aspects of this, there's the rule of thirds, there's the center, there's the triangles, there's the Fibonacci square. Let's look at how the spiral fits in there. This doesn't really work, but I like this composition and how it turned out. Let me show you an example of negative space that I like. Here's an image of Hadrian's Wall in England. It's an old Roman wall. This is just the remains of it, as it were. And when I composed it, I really liked this leading line of the wall coming down into the distance and making that curve. Also, using a human element in a photograph can really help sometimes. In this instance, you can see these people walking off there into the distance. And then you've got the green hillside sloping off and all this negative space of the fog. Let's look at how this looks with the compositional rules. So here's the spiral. That one's probably the best. You know, as an example, it sweeps your eye out into the negative space and around and back down here to this point. The leading line of the wall really takes your eye in. Let's look at some of the others. There's the thirds. The triangles. Now you see this triangle right here. This is a really good example of the triangles laid over the Fibonacci spiral, swirl, whatever it's called. This makes a triangle right here of the wall going in and the hill coming up and peaking up here in the trees. But all this negative space helps keep the viewer's attention in. It's not distracting. Having a composition that is overwhelming with too much going on in it is a problem, and it's something you've really got to watch for. Let's look at this image now and dissect it. So this is one I took just this last fall, the autumn of 2022, and I really, really loved this photograph. The lighting on it was just amazing for me. I really love the low light coming in from this side over here and shining across the image. The composition of these trees with the various colors on them and the light hitting the grass with that dark background really, really spoke to me. This is a great example of negative space with the dark background. It's there and you can tell what it is, but it's not overpowering the image. When I visualized this, I was trying to keep this main tree in a third. And I got pretty dang close, you can see. I didn't use an overlay in my camera. I just visualize it and put it where I thought it needed to go to balance out the picture. That's another thing you want to work on, is balancing your photographs, having it properly balanced to where all the objects have a place and are balancing it out really, really help make a difference. This tree being the biggest one, I wanted in the third. And then this one, the second biggest one off to the right of it, helps balance out these over here. The line of the hillside coming in really help, and the line of the trees coming up. Let's look at this with the swirls. So as you move the swirl around to the different parts, you can see on this one, it's putting the composition right up in there, which is where I wanted it. So finding subjects that are visually pleasing and composed properly is really what the visual arts are about. Here's another one that I really like that has the classic leading line of an S curve. That is something that you also want to look for, are natural S curves in rivers or in roads. They really help direct the eye into the photograph. Look at how the road winds in and it brings your eye in. You've got these great vertical lines of the trees, but nothing is too distracting. As I was saying, having something that's overly distracting can really cause a problem. You can see this one's probably the best example. The spiral, the center point that your eye is going into is right here where the road turns and goes around the path, where the road winds off, and the spiral sweeps you in and brings you to that point. Let's look at one last one. This is one of my favorite images. That I took this up in the Uinta Mountains here in Utah. This has kind of all of the compositional elements that I'm talking about. If you look here, it's got this S curve, the leading line, bringing your eye into the photograph. It's got this great negative space of just the green with the texture. It's got the hillside. It's got this wonderful sky. The lighting is great. It's even got a rainbow. I swear, when I took this, I thought a little unicorn was going to come out and get a drink on the river. Let's look at it compositionally. So here's the thirds. As I composed it, it was really tough because I wanted to keep in the sweeping curving of the river. I wanted to keep the foreground. I had to stand just in the exact right spot to get the reflection of the peak there in the river and the rainbow. I got lucky and a fish jumped right there and caused that. That's not me throwing a rock in. That's a fish jumping. And then having these peaks right there in those thirds really helps make this, to me, the perfect composition. Let's see how it looks with the Fibonacci spiral. That right there is probably just the perfect example of it. You've got this sweeping, brings you in across because of the leading line. It comes in, it sweeps your eye around. You come in and up and you're looking through it, and then you center right back there on the peak and on the rainbow. The funny thing about this, as I said, I don't go out in the field and try to use the Fibonacci spiral or the triangles or any of the other stuff. I just use the rule of thirds, and it almost always works out. Now, I'm not using it as a hard, fast rule. I'm using it as a general rule. Try to get some subjects in a third. But I'm also looking overall at the whole thing, taking all these things into account. Leading lines, the spiral, the thirds, the various concepts like that, negative space. I'm trying to think of all of that when I'm doing it. So Eventually, when you practice enough, you will get better at it. It's all about practice. Composition and photography, like any other art, is about practice. You're not going to get good if you're not out there photographing a lot. So get out and photograph regularly. Take pictures of anything that catches your eye and try to make it interesting by composing it properly, and you're going to find your work gets a lot better. So I hope this has made sense and that you understand it. You're going to have to Google if you want some more information. There's lots of great articles out there about composition and about these mathematical equations that can be used in composition. So thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this, and happy trails.
Fibonacci.
What?